Picture this. It is January 24th, 41 AD. The Palatine Games are in full celebration above you. You can hear the distant roar of the crowds, the stomping feet of 10,000 Romans gathered to watch theatrical performances in honor of the divine Augustus. But you are not among them. You are here, in the Cryptoporticus, the underground passage that connects the imperial palace to the theatre. The passage where, in just moments, history is about to change forever. That man is Cassius Chaerea, tribune of the Praetorian Guard, a decorated war hero who once served under Germanicus himself, the father of the very emperor he is now about to murder. For years, Emperor Caligula has humiliated him, mocked his voice, called him names that no Roman soldier should ever have to endure, given him watchwords like Venus, slang for a eunuch, or Priapus, a crude reference to an erection. Every day, when Chaerea kissed the imperial ring, Caligula would extend his hand and move it in obscene gestures, making the other soldiers laugh. But today, Chaerea will have the last laugh. In part 1, we explored the making of a monster, the childhood trauma, the murdered family, the years spent on Capri, watching Tiberius descend into depravity, the mysterious illness that transformed a beloved young emperor into something unrecognizable. Tonight, we go deeper, into the peak of his reign of terror, the practices that made Rome itself recoil in horror, the system of sexual control that transformed the imperial palace into something that ancient historians struggle to even describe, and ultimately, the violent end that waited for him here, in this dark corridor. Welcome back to the Hollow Throne. I'm your host, and this is the story of Caligula the Insane, Part 2. Content warning and thesis. Before we continue, a serious content warning. This episode contains detailed historical accounts of sexual violence, coerced prostitution, incest allegations, psychological abuse, torture, murder, and descriptions of systematic exploitation. These are not embellishments, they come directly from ancient sources including Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and contemporary witnesses like Seneca and Philo of Alexandria. If you are sensitive to these topics, this may not be the episode for you. For everyone else, understand that what you're about to hear is one of history's most documented case studies in what happens when absolute power meets psychological instability. Now, why does this story matter beyond the shock value? Because Caligula wasn't just a disturbed individual acting alone. He was a system. He was what happens when an entire society, its military, its aristocracy, its religious institutions becomes complicit in the appetites of a single man. For nearly 4 years, Rome's most powerful families watched their wives and daughters humiliated. For nearly 4 years, senators groveled at banquets while unspeakable things happened before their eyes. For nearly 4 years, nobody stopped him, until someone finally did. This is a story about power, trauma, institutional complicity, and the moment when a society finally says enough. Origin story. The making of a monster. Part 1 recap. Picture this. It is 19 AD. You are 7 years old. Your name is Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. But the soldiers who have watched you grow up in military camps call you something else. Caligula. Little Boot. A term of affection for the boy who toddles around in his tiny soldier's uniform, a miniature version of his beloved father, the great General Germanicus. Your father is dying. Poisoned, they say, on the orders of Emperor Tiberius himself. You watch him waste away in Antioch, Syria, convinced that his own adoptive father has murdered him. And in his final moments, surrounded by his weeping officers, Germanicus makes his family promise one thing: survive. But survival comes at a cost. Over the next 14 years, you will watch your family systematically destroyed. Your mother Agrippina will be exiled to the island of Pandateria, where she will starve herself to death in 33 AD. Your brothers Nero and Drusus will be imprisoned on false charges of treason. Nero will die in exile. Drusus will be locked in the palace basement and starved until he tries to eat the stuffing from his mattress. And you will be brought to Capri. In 31 AD, when Caligula was 19 years old, Emperor Tiberius summoned him to his island retreat. Modern historians debate what happened there, but ancient sources are not subtle. Suetonius writes that Tiberius had transformed Capri into a paradise of depravity, that he filled his swimming pools with young boys he called his little fish, trained to swim beneath him and nibble at his body, that he collected the largest pornographic library in the ancient world, that he held orgies that would later inspire the 1979 film bearing Caligula's name, though they should have been called Tiberius. And young Caligula had to survive it all. For 6 years he lived under the roof of the man who had murdered his father, killed his mother, destroyed his brothers. He smiled, he flattered. He gave no sign of the hatred that burned inside him. When pressed about his family, he showed no emotion. One source reports that he never complained about Tiberius's treatment of his family, acting as though nothing had happened. Then, on March 16, 37 AD, Tiberius finally died. Some sources suggest Caligula helped speed the process along, that he ordered the Praetorian prefect Macro to smother the old emperor with a pillow when he showed signs of recovering from an illness. Whether or not that's true, one thing is certain. At age 24, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, Caligula became the emperor of Rome, and for exactly 7 months he was beloved. He freed political prisoners. He abolished Tiberius's hated treason trials. He recalled exiles. He distributed bonuses to the soldiers and staged magnificent games. Rome went wild with joy. The historian Philo writes that the first 7 months were a golden age of happiness and prosperity, and then in October of 37 AD, something happened, something that would change everything. The corruption begins. The illness. Picture this. It is October 37 AD. The beloved young emperor has fallen desperately ill. For days, then weeks, he lingers between life and death. The streets are filled with anxious crowds. Some Romans swear oaths to fight as gladiators, if only the gods will spare him. Others post placards offering their own lives in exchange for his. The ancient sources describe fever, mental confusion, and episodes of delirium. Modern medical historians have proposed several theories: encephalitis, an inflammation of the brain caused by viral infection; epilepsy, specifically temporal lobe epilepsy, which can cause dramatic personality changes; lead poisoning from Rome's infamous water pipes, or some combination of all three. A 2022 neuropsychiatric study published in the Brazilian Journal of Neurology examined the historical evidence and concluded that Caligula likely experienced status epilepticus, a severe prolonged seizure state that triggered an epileptic psychosis. The symptoms align disturbingly well: sudden personality change, hypersexuality, grandiose delusions, paranoia, severe insomnia, terror of thunder and loud noises, and impulsive sadistic behavior. Suetonius himself notes that Caligula suffered from the falling sickness, the ancient term for epilepsy, since childhood. He also records that after the illness, Caligula was aware that he had a mental illness, suffering from severe insomnia and sleeping no more than 3 hours a night, tormented by nightmares and hallucinations. But here's what the medical explanations don't fully capture. Caligula wasn't just sick. He was the most powerful man in the known world, and he was surrounded by people who had every incentive to enable his worst impulses. The Praetorian Guard, who owed him their bonuses; the freedmen of the imperial household, whose power depended on his favor; the senators, who had spent decades learning to grovel before Tiberius, and would now grovel even lower. Whatever neurological damage the illness caused, it was the system around Caligula that allowed his transformation from victim to monster. The first test came with Macro himself. The Praetorian prefect had been instrumental in Caligula's rise to power. His wife Ennia had even formed a liaison with the young prince. Josephus suggests she seduced him on Macro's orders to bind the future emperor closer to their family. In May of 38 AD, less than a year after recovering from his illness, Caligula had them both executed. Then came his cousin Gemellus, the young man Tiberius had named as co-heir. Caligula had already adopted him as his son and heir. Now he had him killed on accusations of treason, claiming Gemellus had prayed for his death during the illness. And then in June of 38 AD, came the death that may have broken him entirely: his sister Drusilla. Whatever the nature of their relationship, and we'll discuss the allegations shortly, there is no doubt that Caligula loved Drusilla with an intensity that bordered on madness. When she died, possibly from a plague sweeping Rome, something in him shattered. He fled Rome in the middle of the night, racing to Syracuse without cutting his hair or shaving his beard. Traditional signs of mourning. He declared a period of national mourning, during which it became a capital offense to laugh, to bathe, or to dine with one's own family. He had her deified as Diva Drusilla, the first Roman woman ever to receive such an honor in her own right, and proclaimed her a goddess equal to Venus herself. And from that moment forward, according to Suetonius, Caligula saw no value in human life, and viewed other people as nothing but playthings for his personal amusement. Peak depravity, the forbidden relations. Picture this. You are a Roman senator, invited to dine at the imperial palace. This is the highest honor a citizen can receive, and the most dangerous. As you take your place on the dining couches, you notice something that makes your blood run cold. The emperor is reclining on the central couch, the position of highest honor, but the position of the hostess, traditionally occupied by the wife, is held by one of his sisters, sometimes Agrippina, sometimes Livilla. Before Drusilla's death, it was always Drusilla. His actual wife reclines above them, her position a silent humiliation. Suetonius writes, and I quote, "He lived in habitual incest with all his sisters, and at a large banquet he placed each of them in turn below him, while his wife reclined above." Now I need to pause here and address the elephant in the room. How much of this is actually true? Modern historians are deeply divided. Suetonius wrote his biography approximately 80 years after Caligula's death, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. He had access to imperial archives, but he was also writing for emperors who had every reason to make their predecessor look as bad as possible. The worse the Julio-Claudians appeared, the better the current dynasty looked by comparison. The historian Tacitus, born just 15 years after Caligula's death, reports the incest allegations as nothing more than rumors and speculation, and Philo of Alexandria, who was actually present at one of these supposedly scandalous banquets as a Jewish ambassador, mentions nothing improper at all. But here's what complicates the picture. Caligula did things with his sisters that were unprecedented in Roman history. He was the first emperor to put his sisters' names in official oaths of loyalty. He was the first to place their images on imperial coins. He made them honorary Vestal virgins, a sacred position normally reserved for actual virgins. And when Drusilla died, he made her the first Roman woman ever deified in her own right. Some historians argue this reflects not incest, but a political strategy borrowed from Hellenistic monarchies like Ptolemaic Egypt, where royal siblings intermarried to preserve dynastic purity. Caligula, obsessed with his own divinity, may have been trying to establish a new kind of god-king monarchy with his sisters as sacred consorts. Others argue that the smoke indicates fire, that where there was this much unusual behavior, there was probably something genuinely transgressive happening behind closed doors. But whether or not the incest allegations are true, what happened next is beyond dispute. After Drusilla's death, Caligula's relationship with his surviving sisters Agrippina and Livilla changed dramatically. He no longer honored them. Instead, according to Suetonius, he often prostituted them to his favorites. And in 39 AD, when a conspiracy against him was discovered, he used the opportunity to exile both sisters, confiscating their property and publicly accusing them of adultery with Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, the very man who had been married to Drusilla and whom Caligula had previously treated as a potential heir. What we see here is a pattern that will repeat throughout the rest of Caligula's reign: the transformation of intimacy into control, the weaponization of relationships, and the use of sexual humiliation as a tool of political domination. His sisters were just the beginning. The senators' wives. Picture this. It is 37 AD. You are Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a Roman nobleman of good family. Today is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. You are marrying Livia Orestilla, one of the most beautiful women in Rome. The ceremony proceeds beautifully. The vows are spoken, the marriage is consecrated, the banquet begins, and then the emperor arrives. Suetonius records what happened next. Caligula attended the wedding ceremony, took one look at your new wife, and sent you a message across the banquet table: "Don't take liberties with my wife." Then he carried her off. The next day, he issued a public proclamation that he had got himself a wife in the manner of Romulus and Augustus, a reference to the legendary rape of the Sabine women and Augustus's controversial marriage to Livia, while she was still pregnant with her first husband's child. Within a few days, Caligula divorced her. 2 years later, he banished her entirely, on suspicion that she had gone back to her original husband. The message was clear: no woman in Rome belonged to her husband. Every woman in Rome belonged to the emperor. But Livia Orestilla was just the most dramatic example. According to Suetonius, this became Caligula's regular practice at banquets. I quote, "At banquets, the women brought by their husbands were inspected. If it amused the emperor, he left with them, and on his return would discuss openly their charms. Let me paint that picture for you more clearly. You are a Roman senator. You have been invited to dine at the imperial palace. You must bring your wife. To refuse would be suspicious, an admission that you fear the emperor's attention. So you dress her in her finest stola, arrange her hair, and pray to whatever gods you still believe in that he doesn't notice her. But he does notice her. He walks over, he examines her, he lifts her chin with his finger if she tries to look away, and then if she pleases him, he takes her hand and leads her from the room, and you sit there. You continue eating. You make conversation with the other senators, all of whom are pretending nothing is happening, because what else can you do? Protest? The last man who protested is feeding the fish in the Tiber. When they return, sometimes an hour later, sometimes the next morning, Caligula would openly discuss his experience, rating her performance, commenting on her body, comparing her to the other wives he had sampled, in front of you, in front of everyone. And if that wasn't enough, Suetonius records that after having relations with certain women, Caligula would prohibit them from ever having intercourse with their husbands again. and then publicly issue divorce proceedings in their husband's name. He wasn't just taking their wives, he was destroying their marriages, their families, their entire lives, using Roman law as a weapon of humiliation. The palace brothel. Picture this. It is 40 AD. Emperor Caligula has a problem. He has spent the entire treasury, all 2.7 billion sesterces that Tiberius had carefully accumulated over 23 years of rule. Gone. Squandered on games, on building projects, on lavish gifts, on absurd military adventures. He needs money, and he has an idea. Suetonius writes, to leave no kind of plunder untried, he opened a brothel in his palace, setting apart a number of rooms and furnishing them to suit the grandeur of the place, where matrons and freeborn youths should stand exposed. Let me be clear about what this means. Matrons in Roman terminology meant respectable married women of noble families. Freeborn youths meant the sons and daughters of Roman citizens, not slaves, not foreigners, but free Romans from good families. Caligula transformed a wing of the imperial palace into a brothel and staffed it with the aristocracy of Rome. Then he sent his pages into the streets and public halls, inviting all men of whatever age and social class to come and enjoy themselves. The customers were provided with loans at interest, so Caligula could profit twice, once from the transaction itself, and again from the interest on the money he had lent them to pay for it. Now, modern historians debate how literally to take this account. Some, like Thomas McGinn, suggest the palace brothel story may have originated from a single incident that was exaggerated over decades of retelling. Winterling points out that Cassius Dio's original account for 40 AD describes noble tenants being compelled to pay exorbitant rents for rooms in the palace, and contains no mention of a brothel at all. Similar accusations would later be made against emperors Commodus and Elagabalus, suggesting this might have been a standard piece of invective against unpopular rulers rather than historical fact. But even if the literal brothel never existed, the taxes Caligula imposed on prostitution were very real. He levied a tax equal to one transaction's earnings on every prostitute in Rome, active, retired, or even married. He taxed their pimps. He even taxed marriages that had begun as paid relationships. And when people complained that they didn't know the new tax laws, Caligula had them posted in tiny letters, in a cramped location where no one could make copies. Peak depravity, the breaking of men. What Caligula did to the Roman Senate went beyond stealing their wives. He set out to systematically break them as men. Suetonius reports that he made some of the highest officials run for miles beside his chariot, dressed in their gowns. These were men in their 60s and 70s, former consuls, former generals, the most respected citizens of Rome, forced to jog alongside the imperial vehicle like slaves, their togas billowing ridiculously, their dignity destroyed in front of cheering crowds. At dinner parties, he forced them to wait on him in short linen tunics, the clothing of servants, not of senators, at the head or foot of his dining couch. But perhaps the most insidious humiliation was reserved for one man, Cassius Chaeredia. Chaeredia was a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, a veteran soldier who had served with distinction under Caligula's own father, Germanicus. He had proven his bravery in battle. He had earned the respect of his men through decades of service. And every single day, Caligula found new ways to mock his masculinity. Suetonius reports that whenever Caligula had Chaerea kiss his ring, Caligula would hold out his hand to kiss, forming and moving it in an obscene fashion. Picture what that means. Every morning, when Chaerea came to perform his duties, he was forced to kneel and kiss the emperor's hand, while Caligula mimed a sexual act with his fingers and the other soldiers laughed. Then came the watchwords. Each night, the Praetorian tribune on duty would receive the secret password from the emperor, the word that sentries would use to identify each other in the darkness. For Chaerea, Caligula always chose words designed to humiliate. Venus, Roman slang for a male eunuch; Priapus, a crude reference to an erection. Every night, Chaerea would have to speak these words to his men. Every night they would smirk. Every night his authority would erode a little more. Some sources suggest Chaerea's voice was naturally high-pitched. Others suggest he may have suffered a wound to his genitals during his service under Germanicus, a wound that Caligula, who knew every detail of his father's campaigns, would have been aware of and chosen to mock. Either way, the effect was the same. A decorated war hero, a loyal soldier who had protected Caligula since childhood, was being systematically unmanned in front of the very guards he was supposed to command, day after day, month after month. For nearly 4 years, Chaerea endured this, until he decided he had endured enough. The system breaks. The assassination. Picture this. January 24th, 41 AD. The final day of the Palatine Games. Tomorrow, Emperor Caligula is scheduled to depart for Alexandria in Egypt, a move that would have left Rome without its emperor indefinitely and reduced the Senate and Praetorian Guard to complete irrelevance. This is their last chance. The conspiracy has grown beyond just Charia. It now includes his fellow tribune Cornelius Sabinus, several centurions, members of the Senate, and possibly even the Praetorian prefects themselves. Josephus, writing 50 years later, names many members of Caligula's inner circle as participants. The plan is simple. During a break in the theatrical performances, Caligula will walk through the Cryptoporticus, the underground passage connecting the palace to the theatre, to meet with a group of young actors from Asia who are preparing to perform for him. In that narrow corridor, he will be alone, vulnerable, and that is where they will strike. The sources disagree on some details. Suetonius says Caligula was in good spirits. Josephus says he was distracted, thinking about the bath and lunch that awaited him. What they all agree on is that he took the underground passage and that Cassius Charia was waiting. Charia asked for the watchword. Josephus records that Caligula gave him Jupiter, the king of the gods, and Charia replied, "So be it." Then he struck. Suetonius says he was stabbed 30 times, the same number of wounds allegedly inflicted on Julius Caesar, his great-great-grandfather, 90 years before. Whether this is historical fact or literary symbolism, we'll never know. What we do know is that by the time Caligula's Germanic bodyguards fought their way to the scene, their emperor was already dead. He was 28 years old. He had ruled for 3 years, 10 months and 8 days. The Germanic guard, enraged at the death of their paymaster, went berserk. They killed several senators who had nothing to do with the conspiracy. They killed innocent bystanders. The violence only stopped when the Praetorians took control of the palace. But the killing wasn't over. Charia had given specific orders. The emperor's wife and daughter had to die, Caesonia, whatever her own crimes, whatever role she had played in enabling Caligula's excesses, met her death with the courage of a Roman matron. According to Seneca, she offered her neck to the sword without flinching. Her daughter Julia Drusilla, named after the aunt Caligula had loved so obsessively, was less than 2 years old. The centurions dashed her brains against a wall. As for Charia himself, he got what he wanted. The death of the man who had humiliated him for years, but he did not get what he had hoped for. While the Senate debated whether to restore the Republic, while the conspirators congratulated themselves on liberating Rome from tyranny, the rank-and-file Praetorians were searching the palace. Behind a curtain, hiding in terror, they found a 50-year-old man with a stammer and a limp, Caligula's uncle, Claudius. The Praetorians wanted their bonuses. They wanted their position in Roman society. They wanted an emperor, any emperor, and Claudius was the last surviving adult male of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. The Republic would not return. The Senate would not regain its power, and Cassius Charia, the man who had struck the first blow, would be executed within days, not for killing a tyrant, but for breaking his oath of loyalty to an emperor. There is a grim irony in Charia's fate. He killed an emperor to restore Roman liberty. He died because he had broken his oath to an emperor. Claudius, according to Cassius Dio, punished them in spite of his pleasure at the death of Gaius, acknowledging that he was grateful to the assassins while simultaneously ordering their deaths. Such is the nature of power. Such is the nature of Rome. Historical impact and modern relevance. So what can we learn from the reign of Caligula? The first lesson is about the creation of monsters. Caligula was not born a tyrant. He was made into one. A traumatic childhood, the murder of his family, years of living under the roof of his father's killer, exposure to systematic abuse on Capri, a possible brain-damaging illness. None of this excuses what he became, but it explains how someone becomes what he became. Modern psychology gives us language for this. Reactive attachment disorder, complex PTSD, narcissistic personality disorder, emerging from severe childhood trauma, the pattern of abuse victims becoming abusers, the development of a false self to survive, which eventually consumes the authentic person entirely. The second lesson is about institutional complicity. Caligula did not terrorize Rome alone. He was enabled by every senator who attended his banquets, by every guard who followed his orders, by every freedman who procured women for his pleasure, by every citizen who cheered at his games while ignoring the crimes. For nearly 4 years, an entire society, its elites, its military, its religious institutions chose to look away. They told themselves they were powerless. They told themselves someone else would act. They told themselves it wasn't that bad, until it became undeniable. The third lesson is about the limits of tyranny. Every dictator, every autocrat, every would-be god-king eventually discovers that there are lines that cannot be crossed. Caligula found that line when he humiliated Cassius Charia one time too many, when he announced he was leaving Rome for Alexandria, when he made it clear that his contempt for the Senate and the military was absolute and permanent. We see this pattern throughout history. The powerful figure who believes they are untouchable. The escalating abuses. The moment when they finally push too far. And the violent correction that follows. It happened to Caesar. It happened to Caligula. It would happen to Nero. It would happen to Domitian. It would happen to countless others who convinced themselves that power made them invulnerable. And the fourth lesson, perhaps the most disturbing, is that the system never really changes. Caligula died. The Republic did not return. Claudius took the throne. Then Nero. Then the chaos of 69 AD. And 4 emperors in a single year. The cycle of absolutism, excess, and violent correction would repeat for another 4 centuries, until Rome itself fell. Killing the monster doesn't kill the conditions that created him. We began this journey in darkness. In the crypto porticus beneath the Palatine Palace, where Cassius Chaerea waited with his sword drawn. Now you know what drove him there. The years of humiliation, the obscene gestures, the watchwords designed to unmake him, the wives of senators paraded like cattle, the palace brothel staffed with aristocrats, the entire Roman aristocracy systematically broken and debased. Caligula's reign lasted less than 4 years, but in that time, he exposed something about power that Rome had never wanted to see. That the emperor was not just a first citizen, he was a god, and gods can do anything. The crypto porticus still exists. You can visit it today, beneath the ruins of the Palatine. Walk the same corridor where Caligula took his last steps. Stand where Chaerea struck his first blow. Feel the weight of 2,000 years of history pressing down on you. And remember that the story of Caligula is not just ancient history, it is a warning. If you made it to the end of this video, you are one of the dedicated. Thank you, please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Leave a comment telling me which emperor you want to see covered in a future episode. Next time on the Hollow Throne, we turn to another descendant of the Julio Claudians. A man who watched his own mother murdered on his orders, who killed his pregnant wife by kicking her in the stomach, who sang while Rome burned. Nero. Until then, remember, the throne is hollow, the crown is heavy, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This has been the Hollow Throne. I'll see you in the darkness.